over this is that the standard in American law is reasonable doubt, right? It wasn't even that the defendant in this case, Rittenhouse, had to prove that he did this in self-defense. He had to prove that there was reasonable doubt that he might have done this in self-defense. There is no human being with more than 2 neuronal firing synapses who did not know this was the case. Everybody knew that this was the case. If you had a prefrontal cortex and you watched this trial for more than 35 seconds, you knew the prosecution had nothing. You knew all of their witnesses were defense witnesses. You knew that all of the tape backed Rittenhouse's account. It is astonishing to me that there's still members of the media claiming that for some larger purpose, Rittenhouse had to go to jail, which, by the way, shows you where they are, because it was never about the case. And it's never about the case, right? It's never about the circumstances of the individual case. It's always about the broader narrative that must be pushed. And just like you got to break a few eggs to make a Stalinist omelet, you have to break a few defendants in order to create social justice, according to these jerks. And so the fact that the jury stood up, did the right thing here, is pretty impressive. It also, I think, underscores how much of a threat they were under, really, because to get them to not guilty, that means that that's either somebody had to be convinced to go not guilty, in which case the entire jury had to bring, logic to bear, or they knew not guilty from the outset, and they were waiting because they didn't want to be run up a flagpole for the grave misstep of somehow just saying the obvious right away. Whatever the case may be, it is perfectly obvious that this jury did the right thing, which means, of course, that the media and the court of public opinion will deem that the jury did the wrong thing. This is what you know what? At least Kyle Rittenhouse ain't going to jail.
Right. No, this is what I want to know, though, on that period where they're just deliberating and say, what on earth could you be talking about? Were they waiting for a mistrial? Were they trying to kick the can to someone else? Or do you think that they were actually debating any of the facts of the case?
Who the hell knows? I have no idea what was going on behind closed doors. It's hard to imagine that there was a lot of debate going on behind closed doors about the facts of the case. Again, all they had to get to is, could a reasonable person have a serious doubt about whether Kyle Rittenhouse was guilty in this case? And the answer is, there is not a reasonable person on earth who wouldn't have at least a pretty serious doubt about whether he was guilty in this particular case. So again, if I had to guess, I would think that maybe the jury was like, we'll sit around for a couple of days and have some pizza and beer and think about, trying to kick the can down the road a little bit. Maybe a mistrial gets declared, or maybe at the very least, it looks like we spent time considering the evidence. But you never know. There could have been a couple of holdouts who were convinced to go along with the not guilty verdict. Whatever the outcome here, it's the media response that's going to be so telling, because you can see the long faces in the media, like right now. If we tune over to MSNBC, I guarantee you that there are a bunch of media figures who are decrying the nature of America's criminal justice system. Well, if Kyle Rittenhouse had been black and his victims had been white, et cetera, or if Kyle Rittenhouse had been black and his victims had been black, and all the rest of it. The reality is the prosecution never had a case here. They never had a case. And by the way, if Kyle Rittenhouse had been a black guy and his victims had been black, you never would have heard the story. Right. It never would have been a story in the first place, because that sort of shooting takes place on a regular basis in Chicago. The reason this was a national story from the get-go is because the media wanted a narrative, and the narrative that they wanted from the get-go was evil white Trump supporters are out there shooting social justice protesters. And none of that was true. It just wasn't true from beginning to end. So good for the jury, good for the judge. And I hope that Rittenhouse, I hope he takes the media members who are declaring him murderer, the people at Facebook who are refusing to allow anyone to donate to his legal defense fund. I hope he takes these bastards to the cleaners. I hope he makes out like a bandit, because people need to pay for lying about people to the point where they end up in the middle of murder trials for which they clearly bear no culpability.
What about the prosecutors? Do you think, for instance, that they should have declared a mistrial? And what's going to happen to these prosecutors now?
I mean, I think that, frankly, I think the judge is probably waiting to see what the verdict was. So if this came down as a hung jury, I wouldn't have been surprised if the judge said, okay, mistrial with prejudice. Yeah. And he says, listen, we're going to have to retry this anyway, but you don't get to retry it. You blew it. Mistrial with prejudice. It wouldn't have surprised me if it had come down guilty and he had said mistrial. If it came down with acquittal, then that solves all the judge's problems. Right now, he doesn't have to do anything. Judges don't like being reversed on appeal. And so, I think what the judge is probably concerned about is guilty verdict. He doesn't declare a mistrial, and then immediately this thing is reversed on appeal because the prosecutors were just involved in too much shady behavior right here. And by the way, it's very interesting to watch who has shifted sides on how judges are supposed to be in the courtroom. So the left loves judges who are very pro-defendant, except when they don't like the defendant. That seems to be the common way of the world here. So this judge was one of their favorites for years because he was famously pro-defendant. The minute they don't like the guy in the dock, then all of a sudden this judge is a rabid right-wing nutcase who plays God Save the USA, God Bless the USA on his cell phone. So it's pretty astonishing. Michael, you know what? I want to take a moment and if you don't mind, play a couple of the clips from this trial, because I think it really is indicative of all this. So let's start. By the way, I just got in the chair, so I literally did not hear even the audio of the judge announcing the verdict. So let's start with that, because I'd actually like to hear it.
As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled? No. Okay.
Okay, so this is the first time I'm seeing that clip. So let me just point one thing out. Right, Rittenhouse there, he breaks down in tears. He looks exactly the same crying when he is declared not guilty as he did on the stand. Now remember, when he broke down on the stand, we got a bevy of blue checks saying it was fake, it was made up, that's not what he looks like when he's crying, it's all inauthentic. So was he faking this time too? Is he faking when he's declared not guilty? He's faking the tears for the camera there? Or are you guys just a bunch of vulturous bastards who hang around to pick on people you don't like simply because they don't have the same political prerequisites that you do and don't wish to uphold the lie that career criminals, child molesters running around the streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin are heroes? If you reject that premise, then you have to be put up as some sort of evil villain. Now, Rittenhouse was not guilty from the get-go. The tape showed it. I waited until the trial began because I thought maybe the prosecution has something I don't know about. That's what I do with criminal trials. I'm more concerned about being right than being first. But as soon as it became clear the prosecution had nothing, this was a clear-cut case. At that point, it was absolutely clear-cut. I thought it was clear-cut based on the original tape. But then you wait and you see, okay, fine, maybe they've got something I don't know about. Well, they didn't. They not only didn't have anything that we didn't know about, they were withholding evidence from the defense. They were literally not giving over the evidence they had to give over to the defense. It's absolutely unbelievable how bad the prosecution was in this case. And all of this, there's not a single iota of this case that didn't back Rittenhouse's case. That's the part that's so amazing. How is this even controversial?